All right, we are back with the next step of our Guncannon build. Now, if you remember from last time, we finished the arms, and you can see that we put the arms together on the base unit that we have already, and they are indeed posable and movable. And now it's time to work on the legs. Now, before we get started, I set up my special light here. It is an Ott Light. It's used in crafting. It's actually my wife's, and she used to use it for beading, and she very graciously allows me to use it. It is a light that shows true color of what you're looking at. So, there are different color levels, different warmth and coolness, and this is supposed to give you true sunlight when you're looking for something through it. So it helps. It's also not just an extra light for my workspace, but also gives me a look at what things actually will look like under regular sunlight. So we are going to begin with the feet. And much like we did with the arms, they are going to be built, looks like 2 at a time. And we start with A1 and A2, 23 and 24. And also looks like we're going to need a PC, which is these poly caps. So pull that out. Pull the A1 and A2 runners out. And we're going to get to clipping. So since I spent most of the time talking about the procedures of actually building these guys, I'm not going to talk about that today, obviously. What I will do, though, is I will get into how I began becoming interested in doing Gundam plastic models, or Gunpla models for short. And it all goes back to my childhood, as most of these things do. I was born in 1978, which makes me 42 years old as of today. And growing up, I spent a lot of time watching cartoons on TV. And one of my favorite cartoons as a kid in the early 80s was the old Robotech cartoon. And that was a Japanese anime that had been bought, the rights had been bought by a company in the U.S., Harmony Gold. And they decided to, they bought the rights to 3 separate, unrelated sci-fi anime series. And re-edited them and redubbed them and changed the plot and basically stitched them together. And in order to reach a high enough episode count so they could show it in syndication. And so what had started as the Macross TV series, the Southern Cross TV series, and the Most Piatas TV series became known as the Robotech saga, three different series. And the main draw for these different anime is that they all featured very cool transformable mecha, which is they usually had one mode that was a giant robot, and another mode that was usually a plane or something similar to that, and they also had a hybrid mode in between, look kind of like they had been caught in the middle of transforming. And these 3 different series use a lot of the same mechanics as far as how their individual mecha worked. So it actually worked pretty well when they stitched it together. But anyway, I watched the hell out of that show, and it definitely made me very much a big fan of giant robots. And there were other shows, too, that were like that. I mean, there was also the old Voltron show, which is another favorite. The original Lion Voltron, not the Voltron with the cars and stuff. I mean, not that I didn't like that one, is that I didn't see that one as much growing up. It was mostly the Lion Voltron, and that was the one that I had all the toys for. I was really spoiled as a kid. My parents, even though they didn't have much money, they got me the original die-cast Lion Voltron set, which, I regret not taking care of. And the thing, basically, I beat the crap out of the thing, and it ended up coming apart, and God knows where. And it probably would have been worth dozens of dollars today. But fortunately, that is no longer the case. It is gone, long gone. But I was very glad when I saw the Voltron came back a few years ago as a DreamWorks show. That was a lot of fun. I watched the hell out of that. But anyway, as I grew up, and I still enjoyed giant robot stuff. This was the late 80s, early 90s, and it was very hard to get anime and manga in the US at that time because it was just a very, very, very young fandom. And if you didn't go to places like Chinatown or conventions, science fiction conventions, to get bootlegs, it was very hard to get shows on VHS at the time that were subtitled or even dubbed in English. Most of them were fan dubs and a bunch of people getting together and redubbing themselves in their basement. So for years and years, I could not find anything besides old reruns of Robotech, really, or Voltron, and eventually you kind of outgrow that. You'd like something new. And what happened is I think, I don't know, early high school. This was early 90s, excuse me. A novelization of the original Gundam TV series came out, and I found it on a trip to one of my local bookstores, and I looked at it like, what in the world is this? Looks pretty freaking badass. So I picked it up, and I read the crap out of it, and I couldn't put it down. It was fantastic. And so then I got the other 3 books in the trilogy, and read the crap out of those, and those were fantastic. And from there, that started my my obsession with Gundam, anyway. And lo and behold, a few years after that, Toonami came out with Gundam Wing on TV. And that was a lot of people's first real experience with anime, especially the Gundam series. I had a leg up, so I got to be one of those snobs that said, oh, well, actually, it was at the same time, I didn't know what the hell was going on, because I didn't realize that the entire Gundam universe is made up of several different timelines with different stories. So I was like, what the hell is going on here? This is not what I remember from my novel. But, and that's pretty much where it started for everybody else, and that's where I was able to start enjoying more and more. And then, you'll be able to do things like actually find stuff online when the internet became a thing, and find, this is well before things like Crunchyroll and Funimation and even Netflix streaming and stuff like that. But eventually they started releasing more stuff in the US because they found there was a market for it. So I was really able to watch all the stuff that I missed over the years. So as I I was able to do this without, resorting to illegal fan subs streaming over the internet or torrents and torrenting, things like that. So it was a lot easier to watch these things legally. So I could actually enjoy them without having to wonder. And of course the translations were better and the subtitles were better, and I'm one of those people who enjoys watching subtitle anime. Not to say that dubbed anime is bad. Like, I'm not one of those people like, you have to watch it in the original subtitle or you're not a purist. Like, no, give me a break. I enjoy listening to the original Japanese because I took Japanese in college, and it helps me kind of remember a little bit of it because I've forgotten most of it. But and also just I like the sound of the language, and it's fun to listen to it and try to remember which words I can remember and which words I can pick out. So I'm nowhere near fluent at all. Oh, I just poke myself again. Every time I'm going to poke myself. So don't let anybody ever make you feel like an asshole for liking dubbed anime. I mean, that's their problem, not yours. But anyway, that's why I'm into Gundam. From a young age, literally from a very young age. It's just super giant robots beating the crap out of each other, and in really fun and interesting ways. And also, why I'm into model building as well. I've always enjoyed model building from a kid too. I mean, starts with Lego and Duplo and goes to model kits you can get from like different types of things that you see in the real world. Like, we're talking like model trucks and planes and stuff like that. And I've always been a model plane guy when I was a kid. My first really big model that I put together was the SR-71 Blackbird. And that was the one that I really spent the most time on ever. Like, I did the detail, I did did a lot of the details on it. I did the decals and everything. I even actually painted it. Of course, I screwed up and I spray painted over the cockpit instead of masking it like an idiot. So that the cockpit itself was black too. But that was my first big one, and I really enjoyed that one. And then from there, I did a bunch of models of the ships from the Star Trek universe. Those are a lot of fun. I had those circling my room on strings and sitting on my dressers and things like that. And interesting thing about these models, these Bandai Gunpla models, these plastic models, they are, as you can see, they're primarily snap together models. You don't spend a lot of time gluing these models together like you would with a model from like a Revell or a Testors or something like that, like a more Western model. And it doesn't mean to say there aren't models that are made by Western model companies that aren't snapped together, but they tend to be a little less advanced. They're going to be more for kids that are getting into the modeling world and that don't have the patience or the dexterity to, or the parents don't want them screwing around with that nasty glue because that stuff stinks to high heaven. But it's different in Japan. There's like a different aesthetic and a different way of doing things where they decide instead that they're going to go make it easy to put together as far as technique, but then make the actual assembling of these a challenge by using really, really very small pieces and then needing them to be trimmed properly and also make sure that they are not they're put together properly and things like that. And also you've got things like gimmicks where you've got moving joints and stuff like that. So they're, on the one hand, yes, they are more simplistic because you don't have the need to actually glue anything together. But at the same time, they make them also harder because of all the extra abilities that these things have. So it's a trade-off. And it's one that I actually enjoy. I hate that airplane model glue. That stuff is just nasty as hell. And I'm glad I don't have to use it. Doesn't mean to say that I don't use glue from time to time in these models, because sometimes you just have to. Sometimes things break. I've broken things accidentally, and you have to kind of glue them back together so that they will work. And that's no fun, but you do have to do it. And other times also, there are pieces that may be notorious for popping off, even though they're not supposed to. And you might need to add a little bit of glue to them so they stay on your model permanently. And that's obviously easier to do with model pieces that don't need to be moved or adjusted. So that's... and also, sometimes, if there's a peg on the side of a model that needs to be plugged into a hole somewhere and they're loose, you can actually sometimes increase the ability for the peg to stay in the hole if you use a little bit of glue or even nail polish on the peg to kind of build it up a little bit. So you put them on there, you let it dry, and then what will happen is that you will then have a peg that's a little larger than it used to be and will then fit more snugly in the hole. And that's something that a lot of modelers find themselves having to do sometimes as well. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just cutting out all the pieces for the ankle joint for the foot. And as I said before, I'm doing this in pairs. So cutting out all the pieces I'll need on both runners. And I find usually that making the legs and the arms are usually the most tedious part of building a Gunpla model, simply because you do everything in twos. So you feel great for finishing one finally, and then you realize, oh, great, I've got the other one to build. At that point, you're kind of like, oh, I'm going to take a break. I'll do the rest later. It's usually what happens. And this is what we're going to do tonight. We're going to focus on building the legs tonight, and then we're going to take a break. And then next time we fire this up, we will do another step of the model. At that point, if I do finish the legs tonight, this next step will be doing the accessories, such as the weapons and things like that, choosing which weapons to put on the Guncannon's shoulders, because they are modular and it comes with a couple of different options to choose from. And after that, there are the finishing touches. And there are lots of finishing touches you can put on these models. You see that we've got the whole sheet of decals here. These are just regular see-through decals, plastic decals. Slip on, put them on the model, bing bang, you're done. There are other types of decals out there too. There are water slide decals, which are exactly what you think they are. You cut them off the sheet, you dip them in some water, and they come off the sheet, and you can position them very carefully, very easily with tweezers, and then block them on top of your model wherever you're putting them to make sure that they adhere. And water slide decals are much more high quality. You can't see the decal lines on them usually. They're also a lot more difficult to handle well, and they sell water slide decals with some kits, and you can also get third-party water slide decals too. I have not taken that step because I find them a little intimidating. So I have not reached that level of badassitude where I can put on water slide decals on my models. There's also dry decals as well, which work the same way as water slide decals, but they you don't need to dip them in water first. Those are kind of an older style of decal, and they don't. Oh, and there goes a piece. This happens quite a lot. If you're not careful, you end up shooting your pieces across your workspace and off your workspace. That happens all the time. Luckily, this one didn't go far, and luckily, this one was large enough that I could see it with the naked eye. When you lose a little piece, like something smaller than this, and it goes rattling around, you're in for a time. Let me do the second one. Oh, I forgot to top out the second half of that little ankle. Let's do that. Or did I? I was just losing my mind. So what happens when you're busy talking when you should be watching what you're doing? Oh, no, there it is. I got it. Too busy talking about decals and stuff. I forgot to pop out the second half of that ankle joint. So I will do right now. But as I was saying, yeah, the finishing touches are decals. Some people like putting decals on it. Some people don't. I mean, they are time consuming, and also most modelers who like to have their models look anime accurate, they usually don't put decals on, simply because you really don't see that much detail in the anime series when it comes to these mecha. But then there's also the folks that enjoy the extra detail and the extra realism, and I'm one of those people, so I enjoy putting on extra decals. It makes it feel like an actual real piece of machinery that you could actually get in and drive around in. And that's also one of the reasons why I do something that's called panel lining. And panel lining is when you take some ink or a dark marker and you fill in the dots on spaces that on a build that are just put in blankly. Like if you look at the bottom of this foot here, you see there are detail lines for the foot. This is the underside of the foot, so these would be like vernier thrusters and other detail like that. Now, they don't really stand out very well, but if you color in these lines with a dark marker or a dark ink wash, they will pop and they will add a layer of detail that I really like. So that's one of the steps that I usually do. I will do panel lining as well as decals. And so those are one of the other things you can do if you want to give your model a little more depth. And that doesn't even get into people who decide to take their models and customize them. And customization can be as simple as giving them a paint job they didn't have in the series or they didn't come with, or it can be as complex as creating new pieces of weapons and armor from scratch, or mixing and matching from other sets and building a brand new mecha based on the skeleton of whatever mecha you have that came in the box. And that is extremely advanced. It's the kind of things that you will see at international competitions for model builders, and they do have international competitions for model builders, of course, and those get really intense to the point where you cannot believe this is a model kit that somebody put together like in their basement. Okay, now I'm going to put this sucker together. Set the peg there. Right? Oh, get in there, you little bugger. See, these poly caps, they tend to turn when you're trying to put the peg in there. So you got to readjust them sometimes. And when they work, they're great, because no, they didn't go in. See? Sometimes you need a little help. You need to angle this back up with your tools. The problem is with these polycaps, they're so soft plastic that if you're too rough with them, you will permanently screw them up. So you take your time. You see, now I've got it. And as you can see now, this is the ankle unit to give a little ankle flex there, which is pretty cool. I always like when things come together. And I really like the design of the foot where you've got this circular pad here on both sides. It's a nice touch. And then we'll do the same on the side. And we'll have to bend this little polycap up again. And then stick this guy in, making sure I'm putting it in the right way. There's this other peg, this other hole here is going to be the peg that the leg goes in when we build that. So the feet are done, as you can see. It's time now to go onto the leg, so I will have to flip the instruction sheet over. Go to leg side. Here we go. All right. Left leg and then right leg. Looks like we do them one at a time. So left leg starts with D1, 6, 7, and then some PCs. Yep, see, it's a mix of different runner types at this point, and this usually slows down the process a little bit. Anyway, D16 and D17. Let's pop these guys out. So yeah, that's pretty much why I got into Gunpla, because both, well, number one, it's model making that does not involve a ridiculous amount of nasty paint, nasty glue, which is just not my thing. But at the same time, they're not cheap looking models that don't have much level of detail in them or anything like that. And also because it's one of my favorite anime series, well, number of series. And as we get deeper into this series, I will, of course, talk about all the different Gundam series out there. And, of course, there are a butt ton. And they are both interrelated and not interrelated. And I know that sounds really confusing. But that's because it is really confusing. Because depending on what anime series you're watching, it could take place either in the original universe that these stories started in, or a completely different universe, or one that's interrelated in some ways, or one that's not at all. So it's to start off with, the very first original Mobile Suit Gundam, which came out in 1977-78, that takes place in a timeline called the Universal Century, UC for short. And these stories, anything that takes place in the UC timeline, it takes place in obviously a far future world where after the world governments have decided to come together as one government, the United Earth government, in the wake of wars and conflict and things like that, and have decided to move into the stars and start colonizing the solar system, because they pretty much ruined the planet, and they have a population that's way too high, can't be supported. So instead they start moving, the undesirables or anyone who volunteers out into space instead, into these giant colonies. They're huge cylindrical colonies that rotate on their own to create gravity. And that's one of the things that you'll notice. A lot of this is rooted in hard science fiction, to a point, obviously. But that's one of the things that also attracted me to Gundam, at least originally, that it tries to be at least not too hard and fast with the rules of physics. Anyway, the whole idea is that people started moving it out into space, and they set up these huge series of colonies at Lagrange points around the Earth. And Lagrange points are places around the Earth where the gravitational forces between the Earth and the Moon and the Sun are in a balance, so that there's very little actual pull on things that are in these spots. So, and that they're called Lagrange points, and they're all around the Earth and the Moon. And that's where the bulk of these colonies are, in between the Earth and the Moon. And, of course, on the Moon, things like that. And so these Lagrange points start becoming populated by people living in colonies. And at first, they are literally colonies of the United Earth government. And then eventually, people on these colonies start wanting independence. And in essence, the story of the Universal Century is a lot to do with the struggle for independence from the United Earth government that these colonies undergo. Now, some of them don't want independence, some of them do. The main antagonist, as far as organizations against the United Earth government, is the Principality of Xeon, which is I believe it's side 3, one of the clusters of colonies around side 3 decided to revolt and become their own country, essentially. And that's what sparked a lot of the conflict, which culminated in the main action of the first series. And this conflict escalates to the point where atrocities are committed on both sides. Xeon forces drop a colony, an unused colony, onto Sydney, Australia, which pretty much destroys it, as you would expect. There are some really heinous uses of banned military force on either side. So there are no cut and dry good guys or bad guys here, which is one of the things that I've always thought was really important about this show. Is it's not the good guys versus the bad guys. In fact, many of the main characters will switch sides throughout the course of the show, depending on who is in charge and who is pulling strings from the shadows. And so it's a very much I wouldn't say realistic depiction, but it's a less fantastical depiction of war, set against the backdrop of giant fighting robots, which is just badass. Though I will say that the approach that Gundam has taken to giant robots, or at least the one that started to it first, it's what you would call the real robot genre. That's basically what started the whole idea of something like the real robot genre. It's a type of mecha design philosophy that says that, okay, these are not super robots. These are not like your Megazords that you would see in things like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, or even like Voltron or something like that. These are instead machines that could feasibly be designed by a military and run by military pilots, like a tank or something like that. That's why they're not called mecha or robots. They're called mobile suits. So the idea of they're like mobile infantry and mobile armor. These guys are mobile suits. So what happens there is that they're more mechanized and they're more rooted in real world capabilities. Of course, this is set forward several hundred years into the future. So there are things that obviously we don't have today, like the technologies they use to run the power and things like that are all different. But it's kind of like the way, if you've ever watched Star Trek, or if you're a Star Trek fan, you know that the original designs for Star Trek were very much rooted in reality and science of the time. So that these are they ended up being kind of extrapolations. And then you have instances where life imitates art, where you have fake technology in Star Trek that ends up inspiring things in our future. Like the original Star Trek 66, all the characters would walk around with these giant like tablet looking things, right? They were called data pads. And lo and behold, the tablet gets developed by eggheads in the 1990s and 2000s, and today we've got these really slick looking tablets and phones that are handheld computers, which are basically what we had in Star Trek back then. So instances like that, you see a lot of that, and in a way Gundam is responsible for a lot of that as well, specifically in Japan, where the Japanese are obviously absolutely completely obsessed with robots, giant robots still. And for a while now, Bandai, which is the company that owns the rights to the Gundam universe, has been busy building 1-to-1 scale models of its favorite mobile suits and just leaving them all around Japan. And at first they were just regular statues, pretty much. They didn't really do anything. And then they started doing things like having lights built into their eyes and parts of their body so that they would light up. They started doing things like making sure that they could open and close vents and release steam and stuff like that. And recently, in Yokohama, Japan, they unveiled an actual walking, fully posable 1-to-1 scale Gundam. Now it's connected to a gantry in its back, but it literally can walk, stand, move its head, change the way its hands are. They can make fists. It can raise actual fingers, and sure, there might not be much of a practical application for this, except the fact that it's really freaking cool to watch. But yeah, that's the kind of things that you see. I mean, eventually, I am sure, because this is so popular, there is research being done on how to make a giant 60-foot tall robot that can walk on its own. That hopefully it will not be weaponized with things that can destroy people, because that would be awful. No, it wouldn't put past the military-industrial complex, which is where we get most of our innovation from anyway, thanks to DARPA and other lunatics like that. You ever wonder what's actually in all those DARPA hangars and warehouses? Like the kind of stuff you see, like those dancing robots on YouTube. I think the place out of Boston, I forget the name. You know, the crazy dancing robots. You're like, oh, that's really cool, until they rise up and slay us all, right? Like, this is the stuff that gets revealed to the public. Can you imagine what kind of crazy stuff they have in those, like, those Indiana Jones warehouses that are hidden somewhere? Oh, I was wondering why this wasn't going together. I need a PC1 for this. Where is my polycap? There we go. See? You have to pay attention to what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to screw up. And normally I wouldn't clip with my expensive nippers, but because these things are so small, it's not really a bad thing if you do that or not. Oh, excuse me. All right, let's stick this little polycap in here. Make sure it's going the right way. Come on. Nope. See, I've got big fat fingers, so it's sometimes difficult to get some of these more fiddly pieces in. Of course, I could use tweezers if I want, but then I'd have to operate the tweezers properly, and I still have big fat fingers. So, not really always ideal. Suboptimal sometimes. But, get these two guys to meet. There we go. Trim a little bit of this off without making it worse. Alright, I just made it worse. I'll have to sand that later. Anyway, this now goes into this leg. Make sure it's all pointing the right way. This looks like it's going to be a left leg, so yes, this has to go pointing in this direction so it can go to the left joint. Oh, and also we need to put the bottom armor on here, B10 and B9, which I believe is a different shade. The color separation on this model is pretty cool. I mean, it is an HG, so it's not going to be super detailed, which is fine. You can always repaint your models if you want. Well, that's a whole